If you're anything like me, it can be real easy to live life without actually living life. By that I mean it's real easy for us to just get caught up in the everyday routine of work, school, kids practice, bedtime, all of these things without looking further on down the road. Wouldn't it be great if we could live a life where we didn't just feel like we were stuck with what we had, but we could look years down the road and be intentional and live a much greater, bigger life that God has set before us, instead of just walking day in and day out with this go with the flow type life? Wouldn't it be great if we could choose a greater adventure for our life? Well, that's what we're going to be tackling in this series called You in 5 Years. So why don't we join Jeremy for part 1?
Meet Billy. In 5 years, Billy will have spent 605 days sleeping and 2.5 full days brushing his teeth, hopefully. He will have sat in traffic for 9 full days. Billy hates traffic. And in 5 years, he will have spent 433 days working. Social media will have taken up 152 consecutive days of his life. He will have walked 3,650 miles and spoken 29.2 million words, hopefully good ones. In 5 years, Billy will have spent 76 days eating and drinking. Billy loves dessert. 2.5 years out of the 5 will be spent consuming media, with 228 days spent watching TV. Billy is messy. He will have spent 152 days cleaning. And in 5 years, he will have spent roughly $40,000 on food, 40 days shopping, and 50 days socializing with the homies. Welcome to You in 5 Years.
Man, I'm really glad that you're here today because we're starting a brand new series we're calling You in 5 Years. Now, you know what I've figured out is it's a lot easier for me to look back on 5 years ago than it is for me to think about 5 years from now. I mean, like I'm currently 47 years old. I'll be 48 while we're doing this series, so it's a little bit timely for me. But at 47 years old, it's easier for me to look back at 42. Remember when Marissa was 15 or 16 years old and Maya was, maybe 12. And so it's easy for me to look back on those years and remember going forward than it is for me to dream about what's next. Isn't it? It's a lot easier for us to think about the past because we've already lived the past. But what's interesting to me is that we have a tendency as people to try and live about tomorrow, but we don't really think about what is really happening years down the road. And what I want us to dream about, or what I want us to consider during this whole series, is that there is potential, much bigger potential for what's next for you if we could think a little bit bigger than just tomorrow. It's a well-known phrase in leadership is that we dramatically overestimate what we can accomplish in 1 year, and we dramatically underestimate what we can accomplish in 5. It's true of our life that we dramatically overestimate what we can accomplish in the short term, and we tend to underestimate the things that we could accomplish in the long term. What if you and I were able to live in lives? Like, what if we were able to choose to live a life that thought of the future and thought of it and said, I want to build a life maybe 5 years from now, and I want to work toward that life instead of just kind of going through the motions along the way and figuring out what happens. I think it's one of the things that we've got to figure out for ourselves is that are we going to live the life we want to live? Or are we going to live the life that we get stuck with? That's what happens to us. We tend to live life one day at a time, and we find out 5 years from now where that led us, instead of being intentional or on purpose. 5 years is a really long time. In 5 years, I'm going to be about 52, almost 53 years old. That's hard for me to imagine because I thought 53-year-olds were old people when I was 17, But the reality is that 5 years from now, I'm going to be a whole different person. There's a whole direction in my life. Now, I can be the kind of person in the next 5 years who puts a plan together and becomes that person, or I can just live one day at a time and see where it takes me. I don't know about you, but man, 5 years is a pretty crazy amount of time when you think about it. Like I made a list of things that I could do, or maybe good things, or maybe some bad things that I could do in the next 5 years. Think about this for a second. In 5 years, I could learn an entirely different language. I could learn French. I could learn Spanish. I could learn any language in 5 years. There's all kinds of ways that I could do that. I could subscribe to something online. I could take Rosetta Stone or something like that, and in 5 years, I could become fluent, not just learn a little. I could become a fluent speaker of an entirely different language. How about this one? In 5 years, you could get an education that you don't currently have. It's easy. I mean, in 5 years, from night classes and online classes and all those kinds of things, you could easily choose to finish high school, or you could easily choose to get a bachelor's degree, or you could go back and get a master's degree. You could get a doctorate in 5 years from now. That's crazy to consider how much you could accomplish if you set your mind to it and directed a total focus of your time and effort in one direction. You could develop a whole new skill. Like maybe today you don't know anything about electricity. You could become an electrician in 5 years. You don't know anything about plumbing. You could become a skilled plumber in 5 years. You could become an engineer in 5 years. You could choose a direction for your life and develop a whole new skill for you. Think about how amazing you could be at chess. If you decided I wanted to take up chess and learn, you could be the next Bobby Fischer in 5 years if you dedicated it an hour each day. In fact, it's a well-known statistic. If you dedicated an hour each day for 5 years to a topic, you could become an expert, a nationally leading expert in that topic. In 5 years, if you give an hour a day to chess or to developing some skill, you could become an unbelievable expert in that particular skill in 5 years. Think about it. If you own a house today, if you bought it right now, it would be in 5 years, it would be financially feasible or reasonable for you to sell that house and make a profit in 5 years. If you chose to read, get this, 6 pages a day. That's not a lot, right? If you chose to read about 6 pages a day in the next 5 years, you would read 60 books. 6 pages a day, right? If you decided you wanted to read one Old Testament chapter and one New Testament chapter every single day for the next 5 years, you'd read through the Bible 3 times. An hour a day would make you an expert in the Bible. You'd be able to spend an hour a day understanding unbelievable things about that. Another thing I was thinking, that if you read and simply just dedicated your life to restoring your marriage, right? If you just said, I want to spend time every single day investing in my marriage, where could your marriage be? Where could your finances be? If you said, I'm going to spend a little bit of time every single day seeing where my money has been going and planning out where it goes, and you said, hey, I want to set some financial goals in 5 years, what could you accomplish? 5 years is a long time, and you could accomplish quite a bit for good in your life. But it's also a long time for you to do the same thing. I mean, I was thinking this, you could, if you were to dedicate real time to it, you could binge watch Netflix until you've seen literally everything you want to see in 5 years. I mean, in 5 years from now, you could still be going through the effects of a terrible divorce that you're struggling through even right this minute. You could, in 5 years from now, you could be pretty well into a prison sentence, right? I mean, like if you did something wrong right now, wound up in prison, you got 20 years for it, you could be 5 years into a prison sentence in 5 years. You know what you could do? You could kind of let things go the same direction they are now, and you could be addicted to drugs. I mean, I don't mean kind of addicted. If you really put your mind to it, you could be hopelessly addicted to drugs. You could wind up inside in 5 years, if you really thought about it, or really, if you didn't think about it, you could wind up in a mountain of debt, right? You could be overwhelmed with thousands and thousands of dollars worth of consumer credit card debt. All you'd have to do is just kind of not really pay attention to it, charge up more than you pay off. It's all that really matters. 5 years is a long time. I was thinking this, you could be completely over or past your addiction, or you could lose everything to it in 5 years. It's really a choice, isn't it? 5 years is a long time. I could either be past my addiction, or I could have lost everything, my family and all my stuff, to it. Or maybe you could lean into Jesus and your spouse, and you could heal your marriage issues that you're going through right now. You could be intentional about it, and you could lean into Jesus and your spouse and heal those, or you could be through a divorce, a painful divorce, and drag your kids through it. Or you could find out what's behind your tendency to get angry, or you could find out what's behind your tendency to gamble, or your tendency to get jealous. You could find out what's behind it and find healing through it in 5 years, or you could let it take over your life. You could let it consume everything. Because 5 years is a long time, and it's something that you and I have to understand, is that you and I could set a pretty great pattern for our life. But today, this message, what we're talking about right now, is just an introduction. It's just the very tip of the spear. I want you to know what I do. What I do is spend a lot of time putting together one message that we drag out over 4 or 5 weeks. So we put one message together and we'll slice it up into smaller parts and make one point at a time through 4 or 5 weeks. And that's what we're going to do during this You in 5 Years series. But one of the things that's maybe frustrating or discouraging to me is that the average follower of Jesus, the average person like us, we go to church somewhere between 1 and 2 times a month. That means about 1.3 times is the average that a person shows up at church. So what the problem for me, or the frustrating or discouraging thing for me, is that we talk about something valuable like You in 5 years over the next 5 weeks, and the average person in this will be here for 2 of those, because you come and then skip and then skip and then come and then come and skip and come to church and then skip and then come. And then some of you come and then skip and skip and skip and skip and skip, and then Christmas happens, and you get what I'm saying. So what I would encourage you to do is, interrupt that cycle. You know that cycle where you're kind of like, I go and then I forget to go, or I have something come up. And instead of that on this one, be intentional. Like, choose to say 5 years is a lot of time, but 5 weeks is a really great investment of your time. So choose for the next 5 weeks to be a part of this, because each week it's not just these standalone talks that kind of are separated. They build from front to back on this thing. And I want you to dream of a life that you could have that's epic and better and bigger than what you'll find when you just go through the motions. Can I be honest with you? You have 2 options. You can live a life that you get stuck with by just letting one thing follow the next thing, follow the next thing, and find out where it leads you. Or you could choose an adventure in your life that is so much bigger. All the difference is a little bit of intentionality and a little bit of stick-to-itiveness. But here's the thing that we have to understand, is the ways that you let in your life become the ways that you're set in. Let me say that again. The ways that you let in become the ways that you're set in. Where did you get the ways that you are set in right now? You let them in your life, right? You let them in, either you learned them from your parents, you let them in and you learned them from, hiding from behind things, like going, this is a safe place for me. I learned to not communicate this way or to communicate that way by choosing to be safe in a place. That's me. I learned to hide behind my humor and behind those kinds of things to make myself comfortable in difficult situations. And that became the way that I was set in, because it's the way I let in. The way that you let into your life, the ways that you choose to operate today, become the ways that you're set in. So let's start by just recognizing that your life has a direction already. You're already heading one direction, one path, one specific place in your life. Most of us who aren't intentional about it, most of us will find out the direction that our life was headed when we get there. And that is not the most effective way to live a great life, is it? To find out where we're headed. It's the life that we're stuck with. And I don't want to live that life. I want us to live a life that's on purpose and intentional. I want us to use the best of this time. That's what Romans chapter 11 says. That's a pretty crazy little passage in the book of Romans. And Paul says, got it this way. It's Romans 13. I lied. It's not Romans 11. Romans 13, verse 11 says this. This is all the more urgent for you to know how late it is. Time is running out. Wake up, for your own salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is almost gone. The day of salvation will soon be here. So remove your dark deeds like dirty clothes and put on the shining armor of right living. Because we belong to the day, we must live decent lives for all to see. Don't participate in the darkness of wild parties and drunkenness and sexual promiscuity and immoral living and quarreling and jealousy. Instead, clothe yourselves with the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ, and don't let yourself think about ways to indulge your evil desires. What Paul's getting at here is that time is short. We don't have a ton of it left in our life. When Scripture uses the word time and it talks about those important things, there are kind of two different words. One of them is chronos. Chronos is kind of generic time. You've used like a stopwatch as a chronographer, like a moment in time where you push a stop, and push a start, and push a stop, and that's kind of generic time. The other word is kairos, and kairos means intentional time. Kairos isn't about the generic passing of seconds and minutes and days. It's about the intentional use of time. And that's what Paul's talking about when he says this. Make the most out of this time. Kairos. Make the most out of. Be strategic. 5 years is a long time, especially if you just let it kind of tick on and you kind of lived life in that chronos kind of way. It's a long time because it can take you way off track. But if used like kairos, intentionally, our lives could be unbelievably great. And you and I don't have a lot of time left. I was just thinking of a couple of passages in the book of Psalm 39:5 says this, "You made my life no longer than the width of my hand. My entire lifetime is just a breath to you. At best, each of us is just a breath." That's pretty crazy to consider how short our lives are. In fact, the psalmist says in Psalm 90, he says this in verse 10. He says, 70 years are given to us, and some of us live 80. But even the best years of life are filled with pain and trouble, and soon they disappear and we fly away. That's pretty hard for us to understand, isn't it? Because we have a tendency to get overwhelmed with the days of our life. Like not just the story, not just the daytime soap opera, right? Like we get overwhelmed with the days of our life. If you've got a toddler at home, man, those days are long, aren't they? They can get really long and really discouraging because you're just trying to figure it out. But what old people like me tell young people who have toddlers at home is remember that the days are long, but the years are short, man. And I remember people telling us that when the girls were little, or telling us like that when they were growing up. They'd go, "Oh man, the days are long, but the years are short." Or people would stop me like I do now in the grocery store, and I go, "Don't blink, man," because it just seems like days go by so long, but years just click by so quickly. What Paul's telling us is that we've got to make the most out of our life because it's short. It doesn't seem like it when you're going through the days. It feels so long and daunting, but man, the years are short. And if we just choose to maybe look at our life 5 years from now and shoot towards something instead of just living out one day at a time and begin to find out each day where our life takes us, man, what could we accomplish? What could you accomplish in your parenting? If you said, man, my daughter or my son is 8 right now, maybe you've said, let's fast forward 5 years. What can I help him become or her become at 13? Like, could you imagine what would be much more effective of your time than to use it with intentionality with your kids? What if your kids were 5 or 6 and you've got them back, with Journey Kids sometimes, and they're back there in the kids' place and playing? What if you said, you know what, they're 4 or 5 right now? And instead of kind of seeing where things go when they're 9 or 10, what if you chose at 4 or 5 to say, I want to help direct their relationship with Jesus. And by the time they're 9 or 10, I want to have them pointed in the right direction. What if you chose to spend time with them every day and just said, hey, let's read the Bible and pray together? What would happen in their lives if you chose to make it an intentional part of their life? What would happen in their life if you said, you know what, we're not going to be a 1.3 times per month Christian. We're going to be a 4 times a month Christian. We're going to go every single week. We're going to ingrain this, and we're going to be intentional about taking our next step toward Jesus. What if you were intentional about your next step with you or with your children? What would happen in your life? What would happen in your story? Where could you be in 5 years? But we have to understand something that's very important for us. Future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. The future you is only an exaggerated version of the current you. You'll only continue to go where you're going if you do it intentionally. You're going to find out where you're at, or you can choose where you're at. Time doesn't really change who you are. It only exaggerates who you are. It only exposes it and makes it more real. If you're a little angry today, time isn't going to make that better. Time's going to make you more angry. If you're a little bit conservative today about a little bit more like hoarding and holding on to money today, it's only going to get worse over time. It's not going to get better. If you're a little bit jealous in your marriage today, you're only going to be more jealous later. The question is, will that become something that you healed through, or will that become something that you let take over your life? Because I love the way that Greg Laurie says this. He says, the evening of life is determined by the morning of it. The evening of life is determined by the morning of it. It's kind of like this. Like, everybody's played with dominoes before in their life, right? I mean, we've stacked them up like this. We probably learned to play with dominoes this way before you learned to play dominoes the real way. And here's the thing about it is, what we know is that what happens here at the end of the train is determined by what happens here at the beginning of the train. If I leave this beginning one standing up, the end one doesn't fall down. But if I choose to knock that one over, knocks them all over. Because it's a series of things that happen in our lives that you and I choose to go through the next day all the time. Now, here's the question. Are you in your life, in your 5-year vision of your life, are you just seeing how the next day falls over and seeing what happens? Or are you planning out where it would go? Are you setting up the dominoes in a way where you go, man, it would be great if it went this direction instead of that one? And what if this one went that direction instead of the other? And what if I were intentional and I could do something much more amazing than just figure out where my life ends up? What if I could choose the adventure to find out and follow in a certain way? Here's the thing. We have a tendency to look a little bit down on the idea of going through the motions. But going through the motions is only a bad thing if you're going through the wrong motions. What if you chose a direction for your life and then followed that and followed really kind of the heart of what Paul was saying, that this time is short. You don't have a lot of it. What if we were to use it on purpose? What if we were to choose a direction instead of find out where it went? What if we were to live a life we chose instead of living the life that we got stuck with? I don't know about you, but I don't want that to be the case for my life. But this whole dominoes thing is missing a piece, isn't it? Because there's a lot of wasted energy here. We may not know this, but dominoes it's a pretty interesting idea because there's wasted energy. Each domino isn't just capable of knocking over the next domino. Each domino is physically capable of knocking down a domino 1.5 times its size. Really, it's the principle of compound interest. Albert Einstein said it was that compound interest is the most profound thing to ever be known by the world, because those who understand it earn it, and those who don't understand it pay it. Credit card debt, right? So here's the thing, that our life could be lived in a direction that is unbelievably valuable if we choose the direction, because we have this principle of compound interest. Here, let me let this unbelievably nerdy guy explain it to you.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes. And the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
What's crazy about it is we usually take that little tiny domino. Let's imagine this little one was that one he set down with the tweezers. And we try to knock down the very biggest domino, don't we? We try to knock down the 100-pound domino that's on the end. And we take this little tiny one and we throw it at the end one, right? We say, my marriage is a mess and I'm going to really try to knock down the big one. I'm really going to try to live this right. And so we take our little domino and we throw it at it, right? And we're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the dishes. I'm going to do the dishes tonight and I'm going to tell my wife I love her. And then the next day she still treats you with the same kind of problems, right? And what do? You go, well, I tried that yesterday. We take the little one and we throw it at the big one and it doesn't work and we get discouraged. Or we're like, I read through the Bible one time and I didn't become a man of God overnight, right? And so we take the little one and we throw it at the big one. But what we don't do is say, you know what I can do? Is I'm going to do the dishes and tell my wife I love her every night for 5 years. And I'm going to choose to let the little one knock down one that's 1.5 times its own size. And then I'm going to let it knock down the one that's 1.5 times its size. And we're going to knock the big one down in the long term. What that teaches us about our life, then the thing that I want you to take away from today is that ongoing consistency trumps short-term intensity. Ongoing consistency trumps short-term intensity. Us taking the little domino and throwing it as hard as we can at the end domino is not valuable. What is valuable is us applying long-term, ongoing consistency in our life and trusting that intentional steps in the right direction are better than quick, intense steps in a short direction. That's what's important for us today. Ongoing consistency is more powerful than in short-term intensity. So here's the next step I want to challenge you to take. Right now, I just would like you to take a few minutes after we're done here today and make a list. Some of you are list makers and you're like, ooh, I get to make a list. That sounds fun. I like lists. But make a list of dreams where your life could be in 5 years. Where would your parenting be? Where could your parenting show up? If there weren't anything in the way and you just applied yourself for 5 years, where could your relationship with your kids be? Where could your relationship with Jesus be? Where could your relationship with your spouse be? Where would your marriage show up? Where would you be able to win? Where could your finances be? If you saved, how much savings, if you just applied yourself for 5 years and applied ongoing consistency instead of short-term intensity, can you imagine where things could be? Make a list of where you could be. Over this series, I'm hoping that you'll be able to identify some clear places in your life that you're going to be able to point your life for you in 5 years and start living that life today.